I thought I would start out by sharing a little bit of my story and how I ended up with an English degree and how that brought me around to public relations. So I graduated from UCCS with a degree in English in '05, and my first job out of college was at Fort Carson, writing for the Mountaineer newspaper, and that was an incredible experience. I've lived here for many years and have never really had a day-to-day interaction with military, and it gave me such an appreciation of what our soldiers and officers and families, all the sacrifices that they're making and as they serve. And so one of the first stories that I wrote, the editor was surprised, I think it was 5,000 words. It was about an 8-year-old girl, and she was very precocious, very old for her age, and she explained to me her story of how her father had been deployed 5 times in her very young life, and she was having a lot of depression and anxiety and sadness and anger. And she told me her story, if you can imagine an 8-year-old telling me all this. And then she went to therapy at Evans Army Community Hospital for 6 months, and it absolutely transformed her. And she showed me her drawings beforehand. They were very dark and dreary and sad. They almost looked like a war zone. And then showed me her pictures that she had started drawing after therapy. And in fact, I included those pictures in the story. And so my whole time at Fort Carson, my point with that is that I really felt like I was helping people. So here I was able to take her story and put that out in the newspaper for other families to read, for parents, so that they could see the types of services available for the families on post. And so that was incredible. Every day I felt like I was helping people. And then another thing that I did is I covered homecomings, and there is nothing like the feeling of being in a gym with 300 to 500 people who haven't seen their loved ones in 12 to 18 months. It gives me chills just now just to think of it. It was incredible, just the vibrations in the room and the electric energy and people so excited. They do a quick ceremony and then they release them and they're just running together. So these are just a couple of the homecoming photos that I took while I was there. And that's something you'll never forget, and it always brought tears to my eyes. And then there were adrenaline-laced days. This was a lot of fun. I would go downrange with the troops. I would literally ride in tanks with the troops and wearing bulletproof vests, and I got to crawl on the ground to take photos, and they'd be shooting any kind of live ammunition that you can think of. I've been hit in the face with hot shells, and I thought, this is the coolest job in the world. It was a lot of fun. And then I would interview the soldiers and the officers and write a whole story about it. And this is just one of the many that I did. So I ended up getting a reputation, and commanders would call me and say, oh, we saw that spread you did last week. We want you to come cover our training. And so that was another morale boosting. I knew that I was helping soldiers tell their stories when they would go home and show people, what they were doing on a daily basis. So it was probably one of the best jobs that you can imagine having. But then one day I got a phone call, and the company that owns the Fort Carson Mountaineer is Colorado Publishing, which owns the Colorado Springs Business Journal. And they called and said, we need you to come downtown and write for the Business Journal. And I said, what? I don't do business. I know people. I don't know business. What do you mean? But I didn't have a choice. I went downtown to talk to them because that was my employer, and it was worse than I imagined. They wanted me to write about banking and finance. I can't think of anything more intimidating for an English major. I'm the student who got an A+ in advanced grammar. I wish that my professor were here so I could tell her how much that has actually come in handy in my job, tremendously. And everyone at work knows if there's a grammar question, come ask me. And so here I was thrown into covering banking and finance, and they said, you'll learn. And I thought, well, even if I do learn, how is this going to help people the way I was helping people at Fort Carson? But off I went. And so, and they were right. I did learn in time, and I started going to economic forums and financial seminars, and then taking what I felt was the most important information and writing stories to small business owners. And it started working. Pretty soon I had small business owners coming up and saying, thank you for that article last week. You helped me understand about taxes and what type of a corporate entity my business needs to be, how it needs to be structured, etc. And so I started getting feedback that I was helping people, and then that made me feel good again. I had a job that I could enjoy again. So I was at the Business Journal for 5.5 years. And then I left to do freelance editing and PR for a couple of years. Then I went and worked for a small advertising agency for a while. And then the Business Journal came back. They were by that time under local ownership, as they still are now. And they asked me to come back as the associate editor. So I did that, and that was a whole lot of fun. But then my boss at Blakely & Company, where I am now, she lured me, wooed me, whatever you want to say. She enticed me to come work for her, and that was 2 years ago. And so I've been the director of public relations since then. So I'm now on the other side helping small business owners. It's actually easier to write a story yourself than to convince the media to do it, but that's what I do now, is help small business owners tell their story to the media, and so that the media will cover them. So I've definitely come full circle to be here with you tonight. I just wanted to share that background, and so we can get to the topic at hand, which is public relations versus, well, public relations in general. But I want to start out with what is the difference between PR and advertising, because it can be very confusing. And we're bombarded sometimes with hybrids, with these advertorials that look like a story, but somebody has paid to place them, and so they're confusing. But basically, we have two groups. We have advertising, which is paid for, and then public relations, which is not. And I hesitate to use the word free, because it takes time and effort and money to get the media to cover you. But it's not like an ad where you call up the Gazette and you place an ad for $200 or something. It's they're writing about you. And but one of the main differences is that with advertising, you choose a message. You can tell them what you want. You can say, if you drive this car, your life will be nearly perfect. If you wear this watch, you'll be popular and good things will happen to you. And truth in advertising notwithstanding, people can say almost whatever they want in an ad, as long as they're not completely misrepresenting, but they can tell you that you'll feel this way if you use this product or whatever. And so, as you can see here, what are you more apt to believe when somebody's screaming, we're trustworthy, but they've paid for that ad, versus somebody else, a reporter, talking about a company and what they've done, and the company did not pay to get that coverage. So that's the main difference there. But then with PR, you don't have control over the message. And so you have to be prepared that if you do get coverage, that there will be a mix. There will be some good things in there, and there will be some things in there that you think, oh, I really wish they hadn't put that in that article. And so you say, why take the risk? Well, again, still, people are going to be far more interested in your product or your service or your company, even if there's some negative stuff in there, by having a reporter write about it objectively, knowing that this is not an ad and it wasn't paid for. So it is worth the risk. There was an example here a couple of months ago in the Gazette. Okay, there we go. I don't know if you can see. This photo was in the Gazette on the front of the lifestyle section. This is Jen Molson, and she is the entertainment reporter. And she wrote about trying her personal experience trying cryotherapy at this new spa that started in town. And she doesn't like being cold, but anyway, it was a fascinating article. And I guarantee that people tried it as a result of her article, not from all the ads that I kept hearing on the radio. Because you hear an ad, you think, of course they say it's wonderful. That's what everybody says in an ad. But it's unusual, it's new, this is the first one in the area. It can seem a little bit scary, so I'm not going to try it. But once I saw this article, I have yet to try, but I want to, and I would now because of reading it. But here's that side where you don't get to control the message. It was a glowing article, but she mentioned in there that in another state, a woman did cryotherapy alone without having somebody there to monitor her like you're supposed to, and she died. So can you imagine when this article came out and the owners of the spa are thinking, oh my goodness, I can't believe she wrote that. But still, the overall was a very positive message because she said, I don't even like being cold, and this wasn't that bad. It was quick and easy. It's only 3 minutes. They warm you back up afterward. It improves your health. It's supposed to improve your sports performance and your sports recovery, etc. You get sick less often. So this was an incredible, firsthand account of how wonderful cryotherapy can be. So despite not having perfect control over the message, the spa owners came out with an article that was fabulous. They could never have paid money for an ad that big. The whole front page of the lifestyle section with the photo was this big in the print edition and all these glowing stories about it. So you have to ignore that little negative part that they threw in there and realize I'm sure they gained a lot of clients from that. So let's move on to how the internet has changed public relations. Traditionally, when you got interviewed or the TV station came out to do a story, you had one chance to shine, and that was that night when the news came out on the TV or the next morning when it came out in the print edition. And if somebody didn't see it when it happened, you were out of luck. Or here's another big thing that, and I've actually had this happen, if you'll know from watching the news at night that if there's anything negative, that trumps all other news. So let's say you're having a grand opening or you're having some large event, and God forbid there is a fire or a suicide or a murder. I'm sorry, but no matter how wonderful your event is, you're not going to get any coverage. All the news media is going to run over to the tragedy and cover that. So traditionally, you were really out of luck if something like that happened. But today we have social media, so it doesn't just live once. You can repurpose that material. You can put it on your website. You can send it out on Twitter, on LinkedIn, Facebook, or a million other platforms, depending on which ones you're using. And you can also tag the reporter and tag the media outlet. And I don't know if you can see there, but this is an actual screenshot of my personal Twitter account, and I thanked Macy Egeland. She is a reporter with Fox 21 News. I thanked her for giving us great coverage in the Gazette for the City of Cripple Creek Ice Festival. The City of Cripple Creek is one of our clients. So I thanked her for her coverage. She noticed that. She liked it, and then Fox 21 News retweeted my tweet. So in other words, they notice when you do that. So if you do get any coverage, or anytime you read an interesting article, retweet it and tag the reporter and the media outlet. You'll start to, they'll start to notice who you are, and you can get some attention from that. The other way that the internet has changed PR is by the way you can respond to people. So you don't have to wait a month for someone to write a letter to complain. They can put it on social media right away. But on the other hand, they can also give you a compliment, and you can thank them right there on social media in real time. And if there is an issue that they're letting you know about via social media, you can address that publicly and let them know you're willing to handle that, and let's take this offline, and then exchange emails. So that way you've publicly shown everyone that you're willing to work with this person about this situation, and then you take the rest of the conversation offline. And then the third main thing is lightning speed. So reporters are having to not only write stories, but put out their information on Twitter. It's a who got the news out on Twitter first, or any other news source, and also their turnaround time is much faster. So if you get a call from the media and they want an interview, I'm hoping you respond in less than an hour, because yes, I'm willing to be interviewed. When, where, what do we need to do to let them know you're available? Otherwise, they will move on to the next person because they have to feed that machine. They need somebody to talk to, and it needs to be quickly. So there are definitely advantages and disadvantages. I would like to say that the advantages outweigh it, because now you can repurpose your coverage and get that out to a much broader audience than just the people who happen to be sitting at home watching TV that night or reading that hard copy paper the next day. So you're saying, well, now how do I get some of these opportunities? So the first thing we know about this town is that we're roughly 600,000 people in El Paso County. We're still a very small town, and it's definitely about relationships. And so I would advise you to go to events, and especially to media events. The Business Journal has an event every month. I'm not saying that can be cost prohibitive, I understand that, but go every couple of months and introduce yourselves to the reporters, to the editors, chit chat with them, find out what they do, which beats they cover, talk to them about yourself, your business, and what you're doing, etc. And a lot of the stories that you see in the paper are because they have personally met those people, or so-and-so introduced them or something. And so it can seem very intimidating trying to pitch a story to a reporter, but they're humans. And so they work like all of us do, with face-to-face contact. So once they get to know you, then it's much easier to say, oh, I'm writing a story about electronics and I think you might be able to help me, etc. And so you start building relationships with them. And the Gazette, unfortunately, doesn't do a lot of events, but they do have an annual Meet the Press breakfast, and they bring in media representatives from around the city, and each of them sit on a panel and talk about different ways to get coverage on TV, radio, and print. So I would definitely recommend going to that. And another thing would be to, again, different ways to get PR attention. If you're going to host an event, partner with a nonprofit for it. And that is a good way to get media attention. You're not just having an event for your company, you are helping a cause. And another thing, this takes a little bit of work and effort, but anytime you hire someone, you promote someone, you or somebody on your team joins a board, you receive a trade industry recognition or award or anything like that, write up the details and send it to the Gazette and to the Business Journal. The Gazette has the movers and shakers section, and the Business Journal has the people on the move section, or kudos if it's for an award. And if it involves a person, then you send a high-resolution headshot photo in with that, and the person's name and what board they've joined or what position they've been promoted to, etc. And so this is, and it's free. So they need to fill these sections, so you're doing them a favor, and they're doing you a favor by getting your name out there. And then business news. So the good news is that the Colorado Springs Business Journal features a small business every single week. That's a burden for them. They have to find a company to fill that space. So why shouldn't it be your company? So put together, some of your best points when you reach out to them, but they will want details, either revenue numbers or at least year-over-year growth, number of employees, how long you've been in business, things that differentiate you from the competition, and then some good stories too. It is to make the story interesting. It shouldn't just all be business facts. There needs to be some challenges that you've overcome, some funny things that have happened along the way, etc. Sit down and think of some of those things before you reach out to them, but it's worth a try, because eventually they have every week they have that machine to fill. And if you're a startup experiencing explosive growth, let the media know. If your business is expanding and hiring more employees, let them know. And if you've landed a large contract, definitely let them know. Those when you see those reports in the Gazette, so-and-so or the Business Journal landed a contract, that's because they reached out to the newspaper and told them. You know, they don't have time. Newsrooms are shrinking. They don't have time to go chase down all of the news. A lot of their news comes from people reaching out to them. So that should be encouraging to you not to be intimidated, you know, to let them know what's going on. So along those lines, how do you build a relationship so that you can pitch news to someone? First of all, as I'd mentioned earlier, be responsive to their inquiries. It doesn't mean you have to be able to talk to them right then, but call them right back and say, yes, I'm willing, you know, what's your deadline? And then what's the story about, so that you'll know what part your piece is playing in that story. Again, when you read their articles, and it's not just when they write about you, when you read their articles, repost them, tag the reporter, share them on social media, and then pay attention to which beats they cover so that you're not approaching the wrong reporter with the wrong story. So for instance, at the Gazette, Jacob Rogers covers healthcare, Jen Molson, as I mentioned earlier, is the entertainment reporter, and Wayne Heilman and Rich Layden are longtime business reporters at the Gazette. And if they write something wrong, I warn people, don't demand a correction, especially not one in print. First of all, nobody reads those. Second of all, you'll burn a bridge. If there really is something wrong in the story, let's say they say you have 20 employees and you have 40. You call up the reporter, you thank them very much for writing the story, and then you say, you know, would you mind changing that 20, we really have 40 employees, would you mind changing that on the online version? Which is, that's not a big sacrifice. They don't have to reprint anything. Just say, if you would mind changing that, that would be great, and I'd like to share it on social media. And they are happy to do that for you, you know, but thank them first. We're all human nature. We want to be appreciated first. So, and then the next thing is, when you're lucky enough to land an interview, then what? This is Jonathan Liebert, CEO of the Better Business Bureau of Southern Colorado, as Gina mentioned, and they are one of our clients. And here he's being interviewed by Emily Allen from KRDO TV, and he's actually very good. He's about to put me out of a job because he's very good at interviews. And so there are basically two types of interviews. I try to categorize them just to keep it simple. The first one is a feature or a lighthearted interview, and then the second would be something very serious, or when a crisis happens. So there are two different things. Either way, you want to prepare ahead of time, even if it's an hour. The interview's an hour from now. Stop everything else. Sit down, think. What are they likely to ask me? What will I say? So that you've got some preparation time, and write some notes down. And it's absolutely okay to look at your notes during an interview, or at least having written it down, that's going to help you gather your thoughts ahead of time. And then when it's a lighthearted interview, go ahead and talk and share what's going on, answer their question, and then if you think of something interesting, add that, etc. Because you want your interview to be lively and interesting. You don't want it to be formal and scripted. And so they love it when people say, you know, I almost ate my hat, or something silly. It sounds ridiculous, but when you're reading the story with all this business news in there, it just gives a little bit of humanity to it and some energy to it. So they love that. And on the other hand, for a serious interview, speak very slowly so that you're thinking. Breathe deeply. Think as you're speaking, and don't do anything extra. When they ask you a question, answer the question and then keep quiet. Because when humans get nervous, we tend to add extraneous information, and it's probably not going to help you. So the only thing is, if you're just absolutely certain they haven't asked you something that you need to share with them, you know, make sure to be careful when you share that. Don't babble, whatever you do. And then with some of the don'ts. If you don't know, don't guess. Tell them, I don't know, I'll have to get back to you. Do you mind if I email that to you right after this interview, etc.? Let me check with so-and-so, and I will get you that information. Don't lie. If you can't answer a question, don't answer it, but don't lie. That's not going to help anything at all. And for a serious interview, anything that's happened, a crisis, do not attempt to make light of it or to make a joke. And that may seem really obvious, but it's not. When humans get nervous, they want to make a joke, make light about something, and when something bad has happened, that just comes across as insensitive or rude, etc., and it won't work. So just play it very straight and just get through it. And the other thing would be, another trick is when they're interviewing you, they've asked you a bunch of questions about yourself and they've got you warmed up, and then they say, well, what do you think of the CEO of XYZ bank down the road? She made the decision to blah, blah, blah. Well, what do you think? And how do you think that's going to affect their company? Stay in your lane. Do not fall for that. Don't answer it. And in fact, don't even repeat the CEO's name or the company name, because then they have you saying this person's name. You know, they can quote you because now you've said it. So just say, I don't work for that company, so I can't possibly hazard a guess as to what they're doing. You know, all I know is the decisions I've made for this company. So don't fall for that. And I do this when I do media training for people. I sit them down for an hour and tell them all the rules, and then I put them on camera and I do these things, and they fall for it because it's human nature. This is what we all do. So that's why I warn people about it. So, okay, here we go. So what happens when the media gets wind of something and they call you and it's not sounding good? They've heard something negative about you. Believe it or not, I'm going to say, do the interview. Say yes. And here's why. Refusing to do an interview or hiding isn't going to help. They'll say, so-and-so refused to comment, so-and-so couldn't be reached for comment, etc. But that's not the worst of it. They are still going to write the story, even if you don't cooperate. And so they will find someone else to talk about you, as I just mentioned before. And you would much rather be saying something in your own words, talking about your own company, than to have somebody else do it. So no matter what's happened, own up to it and explain it in your own words. And that segues nicely into crisis management. So when something does go wrong, be the first person to tell the story, even if you're telling something bad about yourself. Because, and I'll explain a little bit more, but that will gain you more trust in the long run. And but first I would say gather your wits and gather your closest advisors and figure out what to say, and then stick to the basics. Don't ramble. Don't do a whole long background. Don't make excuses. Just state, this is what happened, and take responsibility for what you or your company have done wrong, and then explain how you're going to remedy that. And that's the best thing that you can do. You don't need to, don't want to sob and cry and make a big story, but just get the facts out and then explain, how you will resolve this. So there was a very good example just last week, actually, of this. Maria Sharapova is a very popular Russian tennis star. She's based in the United States, and last week she called a press conference in Los Angeles and to announce that she had just tested positive for a banned substance. Then she went on to explain that this is something she'd been taking for medical reasons for 10 years, and that they just added it to the banned list this year, but she still took full responsibility for it. And she did lose 3 sponsors right out of the gate. However, a 4th sponsor has renewed her contract, and the problem is, or in her case, she did everything right by saying she had done something wrong, and then she told the story in her own words, and that's going to build trust for her and bring it back to this room. That'll build more trust for you, your product, your services, and your company than having someone else expose you. So my prediction is that Maria will bounce back from this, especially as 60 other athletes tested positive for the same substance, and none of them have come forward. So, and she may end up receiving a medical exemption for this substance because she does not take it at a high enough dose to affect her sports performance. But anyway, the point is that fans and sponsors and the media will remember for a very long time that she stepped up and came forward first with this, unlike VW, who has been providing an excellent anti-example for me, and this began last year, and they are in the news every day. Today, it was announced that the institutional investors are suing Volkswagen for $3.5 billion for concealing evidence. I don't know about you, but I don't think that would have happened if 6 months ago or a year ago, whenever it started, if they had come out and said, we've blown it, our emissions aren't holding up, etc. They were lying, they were presenting false documents, etc. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And this is one of the most trusted brands in the world, and it's hurting them terribly, and it's going to continue to hurt them. And they obviously don't have good people in public relations or crisis communications, or they would have handled this very differently. So these are high-level examples, of course, but the principles hold true for all of us. And so if you've done something wrong, step up, admit it, tell what you're going to do about it, and then get on with your life. And you know, people will forget about it sooner than you think that way than if you try to hide it. So I'm going to conclude today with a local example of something that should have been an ad and how some creativity turned it into public relations. So this is a photo of Villa Sport Athletic Club. This was, again, in the Gazette on the lifestyle section, front page, and this picture was this big on the print edition. So it was just fabulous coverage. But what happened was Villa Sport is like a lot of us. They forget the differences between PR and advertising. So at the end of the year, they called us in a little bit of a panic saying, oh, you should get us some media coverage because it's the new year coming up and people ought to buy memberships. And I said, this sounds like a great opportunity to buy an ad. But sometimes client expectations are such that you put on your thinking cap and try to come up with a creative solution instead. But it really should have been an ad. So what we came up with was pitching a story to the media of a new trend. And this is how do we keep people from just coming in January and being done after the New Year's resolution? So the trend is to involve whole families. So some of them offer, well, they offer a variety, either classes with the moms, dads, and kids, so they're all exercising together, or classes where mom and dad want a break and the kids are doing their own thing, but they're all having fun. They even offer baby yoga. Now, that isn't the cutest thing I've ever heard of. But the point is that they get the kids and the family addicted to the exercise. If you have the kids begging to go back to the gym, mom and dad aren't going to be able to say no. And so it keeps people coming year-round instead of just for the New Year's resolutions. Well, the media loved it. And of course, they interviewed other health clubs, and that's what happens if you're pitching your company as part of a trend, and that's something that I do recommend. See a national trend or a local trend and show them how you are a local version of that trend. They like doing stories like that. So they interviewed other health clubs, but since we started the story, we ended up getting top billing in it, and it was very successful. We even had coverage in Portland and Texas, where they have 2 other locations. So anyway, sometimes you can take an ad, what should be an ad, and be creative and turn it into public relations. And so that's my exhortation to you to be creative, grab your friends and family, and find out ways to pitch a story to the media. And it ended up being a great way to start off the new year for our company and for the client. So thank you for having me here this evening.